ever look at your calendar and think, man, there's got to be a more interesting way to track time?
Yeah.
Well, get ready, because today's deep dive is all about a completely unique take on time, creation, and Yashua the Messiah.
Oh, interesting.
We're diving into the Divine Design Devotional
Okay.
by Robert.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
And let me tell you, he makes some really thought-provoking connections in this thing.
Really? Like what?
So right off the bat,
Okay.
he wants us to, totally ditch the whole BCA system.
Wow.
I know, right?
That's a big claim.
It is, and I get it. It's how we're used to thinking about history.
Right.
But Robert, he argues that it misses this, deeper connection to the Almighty Creator's timeline.
I see.
He's suggesting a Messiah-centered calendar instead.
Huh. So aligning the birth of Yashua the Messiah with, the anniversary of Creation Day, that's pretty radical. It really makes you rethink our whole perception of history. I mean, what does it even mean to view time that way, with the coming of the Messiah as, the central event?
I know, it's a total mind bend. And it makes you realize how much our calendars actually shape how we see the world,
Absolutely. It's like this framework we impose on everything.
Totally. Speaking of frameworks,
Okay.
Robert digs into the whole history of timekeeping. He compares the Hebrew calendar with the Roman one.
Fascinating.
And get this, he even unearths the origin of the word kalends,
Oh, wow.
which is where we get our months from.
I never knew that.
Did you know that it comes from the Greek kaleo?
No.
It means to call together.
Huh. That's amazing.
Ain't that wild?
It is. It really makes you think about how these ancient cultures, they were trying to, make sense of time just like we are.
Exactly.
And the connection to lunar cycles, to the natural world, it shows how intertwined timekeeping and observation have always been.
And that brings us right back to creation. Because Robert uses our five senses to uncover this, hidden pattern in the creation narrative.
Really?
Yeah, he pairs the days together
Okay.
based on a sensory theme.
Interesting, like what?
So, day 1, the creation of light, and day 4, with the sun, moon, and stars,
Okay.
they're connected through the sense of sight.
Oh, I see. It's like a cosmic connect the dots.
Exactly. It's brilliant, right? But he doesn't stop at sensory links.
No.
No, he takes each day,
Okay.
and then he draws these parallels to pivotal moments in Yashua the Messiah's life, death, and resurrection.
Wow. And these aren't just surface level comparisons, right?
No.
He's going deeper than that.
It's deeper.
Okay, so give me an example. How does he connect, say, day 1 to Yashua the Messiah?
So he sees day 1, the creation of light, as a foreshadowing of Yashua the Messiah's death.
Whoa! How does that work?
Think about it.
Yeah.
Yashua called himself the light of the world, right?
Right.
And yet, on the cross, that light was seemingly extinguished.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. So the very beginning of creation, mirroring the death of the one who would bring new life.
It's deep, right? And it keeps going. Day 2.
Okay, what about day 2?
That's next.
Day 2, where the Almighty Creator separates the waters,
Yeah, the waters above from the waters below.
Okay, that becomes a powerful, I think, foreshadowing of Yashua the Messiah's burial.
Oh, okay.
You get that stillness, the separation. It echoes that sealed tomb
Really?
where his body lay.
I see that, yeah.
And it's interesting, Robert even connects day 2 to a specific detail about Yashua the Messiah's tomb from the Gospel of Matthew.
Oh, really?
Do you remember how the Pharisees, they requested guards to watch the tomb?
Yeah, they were afraid somebody was going to, steal the body or something.
Exactly, to prevent anyone from tampering with it. They wanted to make sure no one could say he'd risen from the dead.
Oh, right. Trying to prevent that whole resurrection claim.
Right, exactly. And Robert highlights how this actually connects to the airtight nature, so to speak, of both that sealed tomb and the firmament created back on day 2.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Just as that firmament held back the waters, the tomb safeguards Yashua the Messiah's body.
It's such a cool connection.
It is. It's amazing how he brings it all together.
And what I find really intriguing is how he connects days 2 and 5 through this theme of sound.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, it's easy to miss that when you're reading through Genesis.
It's subtle, but it's there.
But Robert's really drawing it out.
Oh, yeah. He points out how crucial sound is.
Right.
So on day 2, the Almighty Creator, he isn't just separating water and sky.
Right.
He's setting the stage for sound itself.
Whoa. Okay.
Because think about it. Without air and water, there's no way sound waves can travel.
That's true. I never thought about it like that.
It's like he was setting up the acoustics of creation.
So the Almighty Creator, like he was thinking about sound from the very beginning.
From the very beginning, he was laying the groundwork for a world that was going to be filled with sound.
I love that.
And that's where day 5 comes in.
Okay.
Because on day 5, we get the creation of birds and fish.
Right. The first creatures to actually make sounds in the world.
Exactly. They fill the world with their songs, with their calls.
Like a symphony.
A symphony. And this is all part of the grand symphony of creation.
I love that imagery. So even before any creatures existed, the Almighty Creator was already planning for like this incredible symphony of sounds.
Yes. And it makes you think about the ultimate sound.
What's that?
The trumpet blast.
Yeah.
The one that's going to herald Yashua the Messiah's second coming, like it says in 1 Thessalonians.
Oh, right. Right. It all goes back to that, doesn't it?
It does.
The acoustical arrangements on day 2, the sound-making creatures on day 5.
Yeah.
And then that final momentous sound.
Yes.
Signaling the return of Yashua the Messiah.
It's going to be amazing.
Gives me chills. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
We've got to talk about day 3.
Day 3.
So Robert connects the emergence of dry land to Yashua the Messiah's resurrection.
Yes.
Now, how does he make that leap?
It's all about the imagery.
Okay, yeah, Mishkan. It's like a dwelling place. Maybe.
Exactly. Mishkan, Hebrew for dwelling place, and it's like the key to understanding Robert's whole interpretation, you know?
Okay, right.
Remember how we were talking about Yashua the Messiah's physical body?
Yeah.
A kind of temporary Mishkan for the divine.
Like the tabernacle.
Just like the tabernacle in the Old Testament. And here's where Robert takes it even further.
Okay.
He sees the creation of Adam and Eve on day 6 as the Almighty Creator setting up this whole other type of Mishkan.
Okay. I'm not sure I follow.
So think about it. This Mishkan, it's not a tent. It's not a building.
Yeah.
It's all of creation. Humanity itself becomes the dwelling place for the Almighty Creator's presence.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful image.
It really is. And think about it this way. Adam, in the garden,
Okay.
he was given dominion over everything, right?
Right.
Well, Yashua the Messiah, often called the last Adam, he's the one who exercises authority over all creation at the Great White Throne Judgment.
So it's like a transfer of authority.
Exactly. From the first Adam to the last, we, humanity, we messed it up.
Right.
And Yashua the Messiah, he sets it right.
Wow. So how does that connect back to day 6, though?
Well, Robert actually points out this little detail in Genesis.
Sure.
He says that on day 6, the Almighty Creator, he doesn't actually name the animals.
Oh, you're right. He doesn't, does he? I never noticed that before.
It's Adam who names the animals.
Yeah, in Genesis chapter 2.
Exactly.
So is there a connection then between naming and authority?
That's what Robert argues. He sees it as this foreshadowing of the authority that Yashua the Messiah will exercise at the Great White Throne Judgment. You see, it's about more than just, coming up with names. It's about bringing order, making distinctions.
And ultimately revealing the Almighty Creator's will.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much is packed into the creation story. Like every little detail seems to have a deeper meaning.
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
It does. But we can't forget about day 7.
Right.
The Sabbath.
The Sabbath, yeah. How does that all tie in?
Robert connected to the New Jerusalem.
Ah, I see.
So, like, the Sabbath is a day of rest.
Right.
After 6 days of creation,
Uh-huh.
Robert sees the New Jerusalem, the one described in Revelation, as a place of ultimate rest and restoration. It's the culmination of everything, the Almighty Creator dwelling with his people forever.
The ultimate Sabbath.
Exactly. A time of perfect peace and harmony, like everything made new.
Beautiful.
I don't know about you, but this whole conversation about divine design has really shifted my perspective.
Mine too. It reminds you that the Bible isn't just some old book, full of stories.
Right.
It's a living text. So much symbolism, these hidden meanings. Connections that can still speak to us today.
Absolutely. It's given us a lot to think about.
It has. So, as you reflect on everything we've discussed today, what really stood out to you? What questions does this raise in your own journey of faith? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so we're back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at, well, time itself, actually, from the perspective of your shaped sources, that is.
Right.
This is a collection of excerpts. We're calling it pasted text. And the core idea here revolves around this really interesting concept of a Messiah-centered calendar. Have you had a chance to look this over? What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty significant shift in perspective, really. You've presented material that suggests we reevaluate our whole understanding of time,
Yeah.
seeing the Messiah's birth not just as an event in history, but like as the pivotal point, the true anniversary of Creation Day.
Mm.
And what I find really eye-opening is how this calendar reframes our entire historical narrative. I mean, it suggests that all of history, finds its focal point, not just in an event within time, but as a direct outflow of that initial creative act. Understood through the lens of the Messiah, of course.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And for you, our listener, who's always, eager to connect the dots to gain a deeper understanding, this deep dive, I think, offers like a unique shortcut into some pretty profound ideas about time and its meaning.
Absolutely.
So our mission today, I guess you could say, is to really extract the core insights from these texts about the nature of time, the act of creation, and their interconnectedness with the Messiah as presented in these sources.
Yeah. Sounds good. And I think we're starting with a couple of really compelling elements.
Okay.
The first is this notion of a creation day that seems to precede the numbered days of the creation week, right? It's almost described as a calends, that's C-A-L-E-N-D-S, pronounced like calendar without the R and with the Z sound at the end, sort of like a foundational day before the first Sunday.
Okay, so let's unpack this Kalen's idea a bit. I mean, it sounds like we're setting the stage before the main performance begins.
Right, exactly.
And the source material, it hints at a Hebrew cyclical way of understanding things, suggesting that to really grasp this pre-week creation day, we need to sort of move beyond a strictly linear timeline. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's precisely it. And the second key area we'll be diving into is the link being drawn in these texts between this initial calends, this creation day, and the Sabbath day. The material suggests a relationship between the Roman calends and the first new moon, and how this connection might illuminate the significance of that sacred seventh day of the week.
So it's like we're uncovering like layers of meaning embedded in the very structure of time.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's start with this really fundamental idea of the intentionality behind time. The sources, they strongly imply that time wasn't just like a random occurrence, but it's a deliberate creation by the Almighty, infused with a sacred purpose.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here is the idea that by aligning ourselves with this original, divine intent, we might discover a deeper sense of meaning and connection in our own lives. It brings us back to that core question: how is time woven into the very fabric of creation?
Right. Right. And the pasted text, it even references Genesis 1.12 through the lens of the Scriptures version, the DDSV. And this translation emphasizes arrangement, adornment, and revelation as a pattern right from the outset. That certainly prompts a different way of considering our own endeavors, doesn't it? How might this pattern of preparation and unveiling apply to, the projects or goals that you're currently focused on?
That's a crucial point. And this idea of an unenumerated creation day before the numbered days that emerges when we look closely at the Hebrew cyclical narrative that's hinted at in Genesis 2.46. The source material indicates that Genesis 1.1-2, it omits certain details that are later filled in, suggesting this initial day singular of creating the skies and the earth was a distinct, foundational phase.
So almost like laying the groundwork before constructing the building itself.
Yeah, exactly, like a blueprint.
And this unenumerated creation day is proposed as a potential, get this, a prototype, first new moon day, which is a rather mind-bending concept, I have to say, when you consider it occurring even before the moon itself was created.
Right.
What does the pasted text suggest about the nature of that initial day if it predates such a key celestial marker of time?
Exactly. And this is where the connection to the Roman calends comes in. The text mentions Gesenius, a renowned Hebrew scholar who links calends to the first new moon day. He references Exodus 19.1, which speaks of the first new moon day of the third month, and Exodus 12.1-2, which establishes the first new moon day as the day for counting the months of the year. So you can see this thread emerging, connecting these different cultural and historical understandings of time's beginnings.
And it gets even more specific with the mention of an ancient rabbi, Yashua, that's Y-A-S-H-U-A, pronounced like Joshua, only with a Y sound at the start cited in the Gemara. This Rabbi Yashua believed that Nisan 1 was the only New Year's Day truly supported by Scripture.
Interesting. What's truly fascinating here is the potential connection being drawn, you see. That this initial creation day could have aligned with Nisan 1 and therefore with the Roman calends. So the proposed link here is that if this creation day aligns with Nisan 1, which ancient Jewish tradition saw as the true New Year, and if Nisan 1 has a potential parallel to the Roman calends, then this calendar is anchoring its very beginning to a date considered significant in both Hebraic and later Roman contexts, albeit through a Messiah-centered interpretation.
Okay, so we have this calends as a potential starting point, possibly linked to Nisan 1. Now let's explore how the source material connects this foundational marker to the weekly cycle. It makes an interesting assertion about the Roman Republic calendar.
Yeah, it states that in the Roman Republic calendar, the calends, which is always the first day of the month, never actually aligns with Sunday. This is a specific detail that sets the stage for the Messiah-centered calendar's unique proposition, regarding the relationship between beginnings and the weekly cycle.
Which is?
Well, that this Messiah-centered calendar posits the old creation day that Genesis 1.1 to 2 period revisited in 2.43 as the very first calends of the year, specifically marking it as March 1st, 3999 BC.
Wow.
And following directly from that, the first day of the week, Sunday, then falls on March 2nd, 3999 BC, according to this calendar. So you see this clear distinction being made between the initial creation day as the calends and the subsequent numbered days of creation week starting with Sunday. Building on this idea of the calends as a foundational marker, the pasted text then explores how this initial point relates to the regular rhythm of our week, specifically the connection to the Sabbath.
That makes sense. And the text also highlights the role of the consecutive wa. That's a seemingly small grammatical detail in Hebrew that actually carries significant weight, indicating a sequence of events. It points out that Genesis 1.1 to 2 lacks this consecutive wa, emphasizing its introductory nature, standing apart from the sequential acts that follow. So you're suggesting that the absence of then signifies a foundational principle rather than a sequential event.
Precisely. The first appearance of this then is in Genesis 1.3, Then the Almighty Creator said, This really underscores that Genesis 1.1 to 2 provides the foundational framework before the step-by-step unfolding of creation.
I see. And then there's the interesting point about the sequential markers of evening and morning. The text clarifies that these signify the end of the day and the end of the night, not necessarily the start and end of a 24-hour period in the way we might typically think.
Right, exactly. The source uses the example of Passover timing in Exodus to illustrate this. Understanding evening and morning as sequential markers, helps clarify when certain events were to take place according to Scripture.
Okay, so we've explored this idea of a foundational calends before the first Sunday of Creation Week and its potential link to Nisan 1. Now let's turn our attention to how this initial creation day connects with the Sabbath, that crucial seventh day.
Okay, sure. So the source material presents Shabbath, the seventh day, as the culmination of creation, a day set apart for rest and divine purpose. It's not just about ceasing work, It's about entering into a state of completion and connection.
Right. And this is where that tongue, day 7, and skin, creation day before creation week analogy from the making sense of the cosmic dots section comes in. It's a really evocative image, I think.
It is. The analogy suggests that Shabbath, linked to the sensory experience of taste, represents spiritual nourishment, a deeper engagement with the divine. And this creation day before creation week, associated with the skin and the sense of touch, symbolizes the completeness of that initial divine connection, the foundation upon which everything else is built.
So while day 7 might initially seem disconnected from this creation day that came before the numbered week, the text argues that the Hebrew cyclical narrative helps us see the underlying link. It's like the narrative circles back to illuminate the significance of this initial creation day, right?
Precisely. And this creation day before creation week is then connected back to the Roman calends, the start of a new monthly cycle. The source material draws a parallel here, suggesting that just as the calends marks a new beginning for the month, the Sabbath marks the culmination of the week. There's this implied calends before the first Sunday that sets the stage for the entire weekly rhythm.
That's really interesting.
What's fascinating here is how the very first calends, in this Messiah-centered understanding, could be seen as a precursor and counterpart to the sacred rhythm culminating in the Sabbath. It's like the foundational act of creation, the initial calends, provides the basis for the weekly cycle that finds its purpose and rest in the Sabbath.
Yeah, And the text makes a really interesting point that this first new moon day, potentially this initial creation day or kalends, began before the moon was even created.
Mm.
It's a bit like the spiritual significance of the Sabbath transcending the physical act of creating the week.
Yeah.
The importance, the purpose is there from the outset.
Exactly. It highlights that the divine order and the establishment of sacred time are not solely dependent on the physical creation as we understand it. There's a deeper intentionality at play where foundational principles exist even before their physical manifestations.
So to bring it all together for you, our listener, we've journeyed through this idea of a foundational creation day, or kalends, that predates the first numbered day of creation. We've explored its potential connection to the first new moon, its possible alignment with Nisan 1, and how the Hebrew cyclical narrative helps us understand its significance as a distinct and foundational act.
And we've seen how this initial kalends, in the understanding presented by the Messiah-centered calendar, can be viewed as a precursor and a counterpart to the sacred rhythm that culminates in the Sabbath. It's like the opening note in a symphony that resonates throughout the entire piece, with the Sabbath being the harmonious resolution of the week that began with that foundational kalends.
It really makes you think about the interconnectedness of beginnings and endings, doesn't it? So for you, our listener, consider this final thought. How might understanding time through this Messiah-centered lens, with its initial kalends and the weekly Sabbath, reshape your understanding of beginnings, endings, and that overarching divine design in your own life? Perhaps reflecting on the significance of both fresh starts and those dedicated times of rest and reflection can offer a new perspective on the very fabric of your time. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Yeah, thank you for listening.